This is the Inkpulp Podcast. This is the Inkpulp Podcast. Comics, hip hop, life. Welcome to the Inkpulp Podcast. We got a bunch of new listeners coming in today. I think this is like episode 2 or 3, or the second or third episode on the Pharcyde Network. I know it's not called episode 2 or 3, but it's fairly new to the Pharcyde Network. So thank you all for giving this a chance. This podcast is a lot of fun. It's gonna always have artists drawing, talking about hip-hop, talking about comics, talking about life. I'm gonna have rappers on here, some who like to draw and paint, as you may have seen. I think the very first episode I air on this network will show that. I don't want to give anything away if I haven't. But I have other, I'm coming in contact with a lot of people in the world of hip-hop, and I'm thinking I need to just have a means of having them on for a portion of the show, if not the whole show. I do want drawing on every episode. That's important to me. And I think that's what's going to make this unique to watch, as opposed to just listen to. And my intros, I'm going to be talking about some shit. So today I want to talk about fear and how much fear is a part of us from the time we are very young. A lot of us are parents, a lot of our parents use fear as a teaching unit. And I'm not saying it's not valuable. Hear me out. Let me explain. I'm at the gym. I'm out by the pool. And there's a mother walking with her 2 children. One is 5. About 5. One is about 2. And the 2-year-old is walking a little too close to the edge of the pool. So the mother, frustrated, understandably, goes right to that place of, oh shit, my kid's gonna fall in and be in trouble. Turns around and says, what are you gonna do if you fall in? And the kid has no answer. This is a very complex question for her little mind. The 5-year-old speaks up, I'll swim to the edge and hold on until you can come get me. And the mom says, well, you can swim, but she can't. So she's just going to sink to the bottom. And she starts going down that path of like, danger, 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 be afraid, be afraid, be afraid. And she's kind of like angrily saying this. And I understand that as a parent. I do. It's scary, and when shit scares you, it brings out this tension, and I get that. But it just made me think about how much fear was used for me growing up, and I'm sure I as a parent have used it as well, and I want to change that. I mean, my kids are older, but I don't want to teach them to be afraid of something, and that prevents them from trying something. I'm not saying I want them to put themselves in harm's way, but I know myself, I'm not a follower, I'm not a conformist, I'm not a play it safe kind of person, but I was raised by play it safe people, and they didn't understand how to nurture in me what was innately a part of me. So it caused a lot of shit in my head subconsciously. I wasn't even aware of it, and until recently, at my ripe old age. So, I mean, the path is go to school, learn to be a worker. In the summers, get a summer job, teach you how to be a worker. Get out of school, go be a worker, and live, if you're lucky, a comfortable middle upper class life, or maybe an upper class life, or maybe a middle class life. But when you're an artist, that's a real tricky thing to understand. I mean, I was taught very young that it's wonderful you want to be an artist, but, and that's the word that always got me, but we support you, but you're not going to have any stability, and you're not going to have any insurance, health insurance, fear. But being a child, I mean, look, I was a rebellious kid. I questioned everything, but I didn't question the teachings of my parents at a very young age. So they got that idea in me, and it just sat there, and it guided me. And I was like, I want to be an artist. Okay, all right. So then I'll be the type of artist that has that, and that was the type of art that was the type of life I thought I'd have, a worker. And that life didn't work for me. And I wrestled with a lot, and it ended me in a depression and financially fucked. And I never knew why. And I just had to learn it. I had to learn it myself. It was my journey. It was my lesson. And I'm learning it. And now I'm like, all right, now I'm getting it a little better. I'm an artist. I'm an entrepreneur. I am a creative mind that wants to make a living doing me, not being a worker. And I spent a good 10 years working in the comic book industry as a work for hire artist, and that was the worker mentality, or a jobber, as some say. And I was living my dream in a sense, because I always wanted to work for Marvel Comics and DC Comics, and I drew a lot of the characters I always wanted to, and it was cool. But it just landed me somewhere at a dead end that was really hard at my age, with wife and kids, to grapple. All my time was spent working, and we had no money, so that was a tricky place to work out of. But I hit bottom, and that's when the light bulb went off. That's when I started to make change. We'll talk about that another time. But I started thinking about how, if I had been nurtured in my tendencies in how I was, then I probably wouldn't have landed there. I probably would have had a very different life. I don't regret it. I don't want to change it. This is my journey, and I'm glad I have it, and I've learned a lot from it. Now it's not the time to wish it was different. Now it's the time to just fucking grind and hustle and make the change, and that's what I'm doing. But I start thinking about my kids. The summer's now here. They're older, and this is typically when your parents say get a summer job. I'm taking a different approach now. I don't want them to get a summer job. They're artists too. My daughter's a brilliant artist. My son is an incredible artist and an incredible musician, and I want them to have the life of their dreams. I don't want them to be a worker. It's not what they want. If they wanted that, it'd be fine with me. I'd be totally fine with that. But that's not what they want. So I told them, this summer, I'm going to invest in your businesses. I'm investing $100 in each of you. This is as of June 1st. It's now June 9th. That 100 is there for your business only. You can use that 100 to make as much as you can before the end of August. At the end of August, you owe me that 100 back. I think that's important. I mean, I know a lot of parents that are like, well, don't ask for the money back. That's mean. It's not mean. It teaches them. I think you got to be real. It's real. It's not mean. It's real, and you got to be real. But there's a caveat to this. If at the end of the summer they have $50 in their account, in the account we're creating for their business, that means they've lost 50 and they've made nothing. They still owe me 100, so they're in debt, and they're gonna have to. I'll help them. They're gonna have to work their way out of it. But if they profit by $1, if they at the end of the summer have $101, that 100 they owe me, I'm gonna put in their savings account, as I told them. It's not there for you to spend. It's there for you to save. And that's a little reward for achieving. I'm going to help guide them. They've got ideas rolling. If you follow me on social media, at Inkpulp on Instagram, at Inkpulp on Twitter, at Inkpulp on TikTok, and this was also on my YouTube channel. If you follow me there, you'll see me helping to promote them. And that'll be good. This is the second time I've recorded this intro, by the way. I got this new mic for my camera, and it's great. I just am learning how to use it. So right now, I'm hoping this records. I don't fucking know. Anyways, that doesn't matter. The point to that is, there's a GoFundMe right below. Right below on my YouTube. Right below in the description. This podcast is free. I love doing it. My fans love listening to it, now watching it, and I think it's a really good thing to put out there, and it's a great outlet for me. And I enjoy the interviews. I enjoy getting to know people while drawing. That's pretty fucking awesome. But this podcast used to be an audio-only podcast for about 7 years. And when the lockdown from COVID-19 hit, I saw my opportunity to record vanish. And I never wanted to record. And I know some of you know this speech, but a lot of you are new because I'm on Pharcyde now. So, to those new listeners, I never wanted to record audio through the internet. I always wanted to do it in person because I know myself from being recorded on the internet that your mind wanders. You're in front of a computer and your shit just wanders, or a text comes in, whatever. You're not engaged completely. But one-on-one, while sharing a drink, in a bar, in a room, or wherever it is I record, it's a beautiful, intimate conversation. And that's what my podcast is all about. So when I saw that opportunity vanish, I was like, well, maybe it's time to end or take a break. And I was just kind of thrown into this streaming thing, like immediately with my art dealer to get some commissions going because their conventions were all canceled. And I was like, I noticed while we were drawing, we were engaged in conversation. So there was no computer distracting. I was like, I just need to start recording some of this. So season 9 was called The Quarantine Chronicles, and that was me figuring it out as we went. It's a lot of fun to probably listen to and watch, but it's also, there's a lot of nicks and bumps in it. Scratch and dent, as they call it in the print industry. So I started investing in new equipment, and I invested a lot, and it's making things better, so bear with me. Even some of the first few episodes you're going to see on here, it's just throughout the next few months it's going to get better and better. And I'm trying to make some of that money back through the GoFundMe. I'm also trying to get my producer and editor paid, because he puts a lot of time into this too. So that's what the GoFundMe's for. Anything you can contribute would be great. $1, I don't, whatever. Just show some love. I'd appreciate that. Today's episode is with Jim Mahfood. Jim's a very close friend, like a brother to me. We are cut from the same cloth. We both have a love of comics and hip-hop, and come from a deep-rooted passion for both. And Jim has kind of turned into a co-host of a bit. When I recorded season 8, I went out to Portland to record the Portland sessions, I called it. And he was there because I was staying with him, and he was my ride, and he was there for every episode, a lot of which were recorded in his house. And while he sat there, he would draw us, but he'd throw a question out when he felt a good one, and it added a lot to the podcast. And it was nice to have someone there, like, helping to steer the ship. Like, I knew where I was going, and he could see that, and he could, like, help get me there. And it was good. It was really good. So since we started doing this, Jim's been just coming on a lot, and I've just opened the invitation. Whenever you want to be in on an episode, it's there for you. He's a busy guy too. And in terms of what I said earlier about being that entrepreneur and being and finding a way, not being a jobber, he's been a big inspiration and a big teacher for me. He's an artist like no other. His style is completely unique. He's a brand unto himself. He's a style unto himself. He's just a person unto himself, and I have so much respect for him. So, and you'll see that. You'll see that on this very episode. But I knew when I was coming over to the Pharcyde network, I wanted to do an episode, just a one-on-one with him. One-on-one is the traditional format of the podcast, and I'll have those. But more and more, it's becoming a jam, and that's because I have the presence of Jim. I got rappers coming on. I got artists coming on. We're all going to be drawing. Figuring out a way to have like guests on from the world of hip-hop, or maybe the literary world, who don't necessarily draw. Maybe I can get some of them to doodle. That would be fun. But if they just want to chat, I'm going to find a way to add that to the show. It'll be like another component. I'll get there. But I knew I wanted to have Jim on, and we're going to talk today about The Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller. It's one of the most important comics for me, one of my favorite comics, had the biggest influence on me, and the same for Jim. And for me, it was the first comic I think I read. I'm pretty sure it was the very first one. I'd never read comics. I didn't grow up reading comics. I wanted to draw Spider-Man for a living, but for me, Spider-Man was a cartoon. I just didn't know from comics, just wasn't exposed. But this book changed that. Changed everything. So, and same for Jim. So we're going to talk about that today while drawing a piece in homage to the book, while also talking about how we first got exposed to hip-hop, our love for hip-hop, and some of our favorite, like, old school. I'm talking old school. I'm talking Dana Dane. I'm talking Run DMC. I'm talking Fat Boys. Curtis Blow. I mean, we're talking old school. So, Yeah, thank you for giving this a try. Check this episode out. And even if you're watching this on Pharcyde TV, I don't know if I said this yet, please go to my YouTube channel and just hit subscribe. Help drive those numbers up. I would appreciate it. Enjoy. Welcome to the Inkpulp Podcast. Things are getting a little more professional in here. You can see I got some nice lighting on my face. Now that we're moving over to Pharcyde Network, and now that this quarantine's been going on for as long as it has, I've put a good bit of money into making this production better. It's going to get better and better over the next month or two as I get more stuff coming in and figure out how to do things a little better. So thank you for your patience with that. I'm watching some of the older episodes, and the sound is pretty crummy, and the lighting's pretty crummy, and the focus is pretty crummy. So thank you for sticking along with us. Hoping today will be better than that, but it's going to get better still. So thank you. And everyone on the Pharcyde TV network, thank you for giving this a try. I think you're going to find some interesting stuff going down here. So today I've got guest, friend, artist extraordinaire, Jim Mahfood. What up, Jim?
What's up, guys? How are you?
So today, Jim and I had a really good idea. We're going to talk about a book that I think I'll speak for Jim as well as myself when I say, well, for me, this book is the reason I'm doing comics. I wanted to do animation. I grew up on that Spider-Man cartoon, and all I want to do is animate superheroes. I didn't think about comics. Honestly, didn't even read comics. And this book was the very first comic I ever read, and it just changed me. Is that true for you too, Jim?
Definitely. Yeah. This was the big milestone for me, especially discovering it when it was coming out. And
yeah, okay.
we can talk about that later.
Yeah, so let's jump into that now. So I'm going to switch my camera to show you all what book we are talking about. It is The Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller, Klaus Janson, and Lynn Varley. And I got to turn off my notifications here. Bear with me 1 second.
Yeah.
I thought I did that. People just don't leave me alone. Okay, so this book right here in this shot, this was the very first comic I ever owned. And it was the very first comic I ever read, and I've held on to it all these years. I've bought other editions, and but I always held on to this. This one just had a special place in my heart. And I got to get Klaus to sign it now that I'm friends with him, which I'm going to do hopefully when I go to New York next. But I wasn't like Jim. I didn't get the issues when they came out because I wasn't reading comics when they came out. I came into comics shortly. I think the trade had just been collected, and that's when someone passed it off to me. And
right.
I read it. But you got them when they came out, Jim?
Yeah, I dug these out of the archives, but these are the 4 individual issues of Dark Knight Returns. Obviously, this prestige format was something completely new at the time. And for me, man, I started collecting comics as a kid when I was like 8 or 9. And then I discovered my first comic shop when I was around 10 or 11. And I was 11 years old in 1986 when Dark Knight Returns was coming out. So I remember going into the dark, dingy comic shop and seeing this thing on the shelves, man, and being completely blown away and confused by what it was. Now, I couldn't buy this at the time because it was too expensive. It was a whopping $3 at the time. And the monthly comics I was collecting, man, were 60 cents. So I couldn't afford this, but I wound up getting issue 2 first because I traded my buddy Jason Eckert for a bunch of baseball cards and shit at the time. So I got issue 2, and then when issue 4 came out on the stands, I convinced my mom to lend me the money to buy it. So this was bought. This is the actual version I bought on the stands when I was 11 years old. Kept it in great shape. But dude, this idea, when I saw this cover of Batman fighting Superman, I was like, why the hell is Batman fighting Superman? They're friends. Like, what the fuck is going on? Like, this book blew my mind, man. And then, I got 2 and 4, and then I had to wait eventually like a year or something to get 1 and 3. So I was reading this all out of order.
Oh my God.
By the time I sat down and had all 4 issues and read it, I mean, this was the game changer. This was like, I had no idea comics could be this, because I was just collecting like the monthly Spider-Man comics. So Spider-Man has a villain, he beats him at the end, everything's wrapped up. It was
right.
It was rare to have continuity-based storylines in that day. And so to have something as epic and big as this changed my perception completely about what the art form could be.
Yeah, I mean, not having read comics, my perception of them were what you just described. So I guess my perception of them was pretty accurate, that it was you read an issue, you saw your favorite hero beat one of your favorite bad guys, and it was a fun little story. But when I read this book at that time, I was deep into skateboarding, deep into punk rock, deep into hip hop. And this had the spirit of something from indie culture, something that was pushing buttons and anti-establishment and all these great things. I think what got I was drawing in class one day in high school. This is my sophomore year, 86. And I don't remember what I was drawing. I might have even been drawing Batman just for the fuck of it.
Right.
And there's this kid sitting next to me. He was kind of like a nerdy kid. And he started talking about this book called The Dark Knight Returns. And I was like, I don't know, man. I don't really read comics. He's like, I'm going to bring it in. So he brings it in and he gives me the trade. And I see on the back, there's a quote from Stephen King. Now, I was reading novels and I love Stephen King. I was like, what the fuck is Stephen King doing talking about a comic book? And then the quote was, this was the comic of all comics. I was like, all right, I got to check this out. And reading it, and we'll get into the depth of this when we're drawing and talking. But yeah, it was like, okay, this is not at all what I thought comics were. And of course, after this, I started reading comics and found that most of them were what I thought they were not like The Dark Knight, but I started really enjoying the art of the medium after reading The Dark Knight.
Yeah. And, I had the same thing where it was like, this was happening in 86. I had already discovered hip hop from Magic 108, like the urban station in St. Louis at the time.
Was that AM radio?
It was FM, but I mean, we called it the black station at that time, but I mean, that's not PC now or whatever. But it was understood, like, this is where you hear hip hop and funk, and Beastie Boys' License to Ill, man, that came out
87
year, 86, 87.
Yeah.
So all of this, like you said, this punk attitude, this rebellious attitude, Public Enemy, It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back.
Dude, these are the records we're going to talk about.
So all of this stuff is feeding my 11, 12, 13-year-old brain, along with starting to skateboard. And I think that, one of the things that made us friends so quickly when we met and started talking is our backgrounds are very, very similar. And it's a generational thing of guys right now that are in their like mid 40s.
Yeah.
Not to sound old, but this was the way we discovered things. And it's a very, very similar trajectory.
Yeah.
Of hip hop, skating, and these kind of comics.
And there was no internet. So it wasn't like, I mean, you were in St. Louis area, right?
Yeah.
And I'm in the Washington, D.C. area, and we're into the same shit, but we're finding it through underground zines, underground comic shops, underground skateboard shops. I mean, it's crazy that we all came from this, because there was no, like, you couldn't just log on to a website and be exposed to all this shit.
Right.
So we'll talk about that. And you started nailing it with the hip hop albums you were talking about, because I want to talk about that for sure. But go ahead.
The other music element about this real quick, I'll say it real quick. The other thing that blew my mind is there were ads for Dark Knight Returns in Rolling Stone magazine. So my buddy Mike Lorenz, who I used to skate with, his brother had a subscription to Rolling Stone, and I would always flip through it when I'd go to his house. And there was this full page ad for Dark Knight Returns with that image of the cover of the trade that you have on your desk. And I was like, there's an ad for a Batman comic in Rolling Stone? Like, what is happening here? So that was another indication, like, there's something new happening with comics. And then obviously Watchmen would hit right after this. And so we're going into a new realm of the art form being elevated right before our eyes in real time.
Yes.
As teenagers. And, man, that shaped, I think, an entire generation of cartoonists and comic book artists.
Agreed.
And we're part of that.
Totally. I totally agree. And it's great to talk about that too, as we're going.
Yeah.
So let's real quick, our goal today is to draw Dark Knight Returns while we're talking about it and talking about the hip hop and music of the time.
We're going to draw. I wanted to show you guys real quick this.
Oh yeah. Show us that. This is good.
Let me switch my camera. Excuse me. So, not sure if you guys know, viewers out there, but basically this is the artist edition of Dark Knight Returns put out by Graffiti Designs. Just wanted to show you guys certain pages that were completely inked by Klaus Janson and beautifully inked. For one reason or another, Frank Miller wound up just completely re-inking them with this real simple, thin, more European style line. It's more dramatically represented on this page. This is Klaus's work. We all know this imagery, very famous. But look at the difference between this and the finished published version. Pretty dramatic difference there. Look at how much more intense, disturbing, and scary this is than this. So I was going through this last night, and it was sort of blowing my mind, just the decision making that goes involved in this kind of production. And Klaus's stuff is gorgeous. It's obviously beautiful, but for some reason, Frank, I think this is just so much more disturbing and almost alien looking.
Yeah.
So just something interesting that I thought you guys would enjoy seeing.
I think that's a great thing to show. I mean, Klaus did a very great job inking what was handed to him. They're beautiful, traditional Klaus Janson inks.
It's so good, man.
Frank did something else to it. He didn't just ink it. He was drawing more.
Look at this stuff. Just panels that Frank decided to kind of redo on his own. These are on overlays. These are what Klaus did. But, I don't think it's any disrespect to Klaus. Obviously, it's just, dude, look at this original. Look at that.
See, Frank can't do that. Those right there are just fucking money.
This is 100% Klaus. Look at that. It's gorgeous. So cool, man.
That's amazing. Cool. That's fucking amazing.
So I'm gonna attach this camera to my stand real quick.
All right, cool. So, Jim, I assume you're gonna freestyle it when we get drawing. You don't have anything planned?
I have the Dark Knight Returns theme in my mind, and I'm gonna.
Right, so you don't have anything drawn out yet, right?
No, I don't.
All right, so I've penciled out this piece. One of the Kickstarter commissions I got was a bust of Batman Dark Knight Returns all beat up. And when you tell me Dark Knight Returns, I can't just leave it alone. So I ended up doing basically a cover So let me share my screen with you all so you can get a good look at the pencils. Right there. Jim,
Beautiful.
That's coming through okay?
Yep, that looks gorgeous.
All right, cool. So my approach here is my typical approach to inking. I'm going to be using, trying to do everything I can to put the focus on the middle right on Batman. I've got the lightning leading towards him. I've got the mark making in the mutant leader's mouth. Mark making on the bat symbol, all pointing to his face. So that's the plan, Stan. Let me unshare my screen. All right, Jim, are you about ready to get drawn?
I'm ready to roll.
Okie dokie. Let me let me press pause real quick and get a couple things set up, and then I'll hit record again. So
Sure.
You viewers won't notice anything, but Jim and I will. We'll be right back. All right, we are back. Although you didn't even miss us. I'm just getting myself situated. So, Jim, I want to start. Can you hear me okay through the mic?
Oh, yeah, you're great.
All right. Is it a lot clearer than before?
It sounds fantastic. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. So, I want to start here. So, these days, it's very hip to be into skateboarding, hip-hop, and comics. That was not the case when we were younger. In fact, like in my skateboard crew, I was the only one listening to hip-hop.
Mm-hmm.
I was one of two of us were into comics. And in the world of hip-hop, it was like unheard of to even think about skateboarding. Although as we come to find out years later, the next generation of hip hop was raised on comics.
Right.
So for me, like I remember I was in a different class, and there was a dude that was in class with me who we'd fuck around sometimes and just joke. He was like the captain of the football team. We like I don't even remember what got it started. We were talking about music, and he was like, this dude knew hip hop. I think he even lived in DC, or at one point it was part of the go-go scene or something.
Oh yeah.
And yeah,
that Washington go-go scene, man. Trouble Funk.
Oh my God, man.
Trouble Funk, bro.
Oh my God, It's rare you find someone who knows even what go-go music is. But yeah, Chuck Brown, Soul Searchers, Trouble Funk, all that stuff. But we were talking, and I don't know what brought up this. I think he just asked me, like, what do you listen to? Like, silly little white boy, what do you listen to? So I started talking about the punk rock I was listening to. Now, I grew up on hip-hop. Like when it first really hit where I was from. So we're talking when I was much younger, and I'm talking about like Run DMC, Dana Dane. I loved all that shit. Did that shit hit you when you were younger?
Definitely. My first exposure was like Fat Boys, Houdini, and Run DMC were like the tape cassettes making their rounds with just a couple friends of mine, and who had like the cool older brothers that knew about this stuff. Right. Yeah.
Houdini was, oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I remember like the first song that I loved it. And like you were talking about a radio station earlier, but for me, it was an AM station around this time called WEBB. It was straight out of Washington, DC. And it was AM, and they would have like a hip hop hour and like a go-go hour. Like I think it was once a week or a couple days a week, and I would just record on my tape.
Yes.
From my boombox, and would just get exposed to all the shit that you couldn't hear anywhere else. and the sound quality was awful. It was AM radio. It was hissing and staticky and popping. But I remember Dana Dane's Nightmares just took me off my feet.
Yes.
That was the jam. That was the jam. So I grew up on this stuff, and all through middle school, I really enjoyed hip hop. I think when I got into like skateboarding in high school, I just wasn't listening to it as much. I was really getting into punk rock and its messaging, and it's sort of like social awareness and its anti-establishment attitude. Hip hop had been very playful up until this time. Right. Like party music and playful music. And so this football player dude, I started talking about punk rock, and he goes, that sounds like what I listen to. He's like, look, you go make a tape of what you think, what you like, and I'll make a tape of what I like, and let's trade. I was like, all right, cool. Yeah. Like, there's no way this is going to work out. He's not going to like what I'm giving him. So I went back and made like a mixtape, like Black Flag, Minor Threat, whatever I was listening to at the time. And then he gave me a tape that changed my life. And he enjoyed my tape a lot. It opened him up. But what we realized was we were listening to essentially the same music. It was coming out differently. So his tape was Public Enemy, My Uzi Weighs a Ton. Tracks off that album. BDP's By Any Means Necessary. And EPMD's Strictly Business. So he gave me mixes of that, and that was like it. I remember this was at a time skateboarding. I was like drawing and writing on my oh shit, I can't even think. The tape on top of your board, grip tape. Grip tape, yeah. Yeah. So I was drawing and writing on my grip tape, and I remember I went home that day. I listened to it, and like a few days later, I was like graffitiing and drawing Public Enemy, EPMD, and BDP on my skateboard. And that at this time, I mean, this is '86. No one was doing that. None of my friends knew what the fuck I was talking about. None of the skaters I met in those years knew what I was talking about. But I got deep into it. Were you doing the same thing?
Yeah. I mean, the big gateway, I think for all of us was Run DMC and them blowing up and, writing that Run DMC logo on our, Trapper Keepers at school or whatever.
Oh my God, Trapper Keepers, yes.
And then of course, like I mentioned, man, Beastie Boys, License to Ill, when that came out, that was sort of like another landmark thing to happen, just like discovering Dark Knight Returns for me in a comic shop. That was the one that was like, okay, these are all just a bunch of like delinquent white dudes now that are doing this hip hop thing.
Right.
We already were into this stuff, but now, we can relate like even more, honestly. And from there it was kind of like, well, all bets are off. Like music can it's for everyone in a way. And, we were already like the weirdos of our group in the suburbs where I grew up. So embracing Beastie Boys, hip hop, Fat Boys, whatever, eventually punk, all that kind of, I think, happened at the same time. It all just seemed a natural progression for me,
Yeah, it felt that way for me too.
A lot of my friends that were skating and doing the and into the hip hop thing, they weren't necessarily into comics. I mean, they sort of knew that I was a comics guy, but it didn't cross over in the same way for them. But for me, being into all this subculture, it just made sense. It was like, this is my thing,
Yeah, that's how I felt too. I felt like I found myself.
Definitely.
Like I don't know. I think I had this thing in me where no matter what crew I was running with, whatever my interests were, I had to stand out even there. So like being a
right.
skater punker kid who had like hip hop influences on my skateboard was like, I don't know, that felt like, all right, this is me. I'm not just like following the trend or following the herd.
Right.
But yeah, so my point was to see what's going on now where all of this stuff is normal and kind of hip is interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I think we've talked about it on previous podcasts that you and I have done before, but I mean, it's okay to repeat, but it is funny that like when I was a kid in the Midwest, like all of this stuff was considered like outsider. And then it did all eventually become mainstream. But there was a time, I don't know about you, man, but there was a time in St. Louis where skateboarding just eventually became like illegal. Like all the signs started going up, like no skateboarding here, you know,
that's when the skateboarding is not a crime sticker was like at its prime.
Yes. And, you know, it was, there was a couple guys in our scene that were sort of screwing it up for everyone, like skating and running over like little old ladies and shit.
Oh,
you know, irresponsible shit that it's like, well, yeah, man, that's why they, you know, banned skateboarding at this school parking lot or at this mall because you idiots wound up, you know, hurting someone. Or, you know, something to that effect would happen and kind of spoil it for everyone.
Right.
But you know, I only had one or two other homies at the time that were into the comic book thing. So it was kind of like I would spend my time with the skateboard hip hop crew and then my time with like the comics guys.
Oh, okay.
And, but man, I just, you know, I had an appreciation for all of it, you know?
Yeah. And I think, I mean, honestly, just looking back for me, like that's what really resonated with me with the Dark Knight is that it had that spirit of everything I was doing and listening to. It was like almost like Batman was basically saying, fuck you to superheroes.
Yes.
And like I didn't have a deep nerd background with DC Comics at all.
Right.
So like I didn't know who Selena was when that showed up. I was like, oh, that's obviously someone from the DC world. I just don't know who that is. Green Arrow, I didn't know who that was until he pulled out his bow and arrow. And then I was like, I think I know who that guy is. Superman, I obviously knew, but I just saw, I mean, Superman was the establishment in the book.
Oh yeah.
You know, he was the good boy, the Boy Scout, as they call him, and working for the government, doing the president's bidding, Reagan. And dude, that was another thing. Punk rock was so anti-Reagan. To see a comic book be anti-Reagan like that and make fun of him the way it did, I was like, this is amazing.
And Miller's drawings, his caricatures of Reagan are so on point and beautiful. It almost has this distorted, like monstrous kind of look to it.
Yes.
And, you know, I can see a little bit of like maybe Bill Sienkiewicz in some of those drawings.
Yeah.
But you're right. It was such a huge part of like 80s punk culture to be, you know, anti-Reagan. And
there was a compilation of, I think it was DC Hardcore only, called Let Them Eat Their Jelly Beans.
Oh, wow.
And I just remember that as being it was like Bad Brains, Minor Threat, Black Flag. And I just loved that compilation. But yeah, I mean, that was just summing up the anti-Reagan shit.
Great title for.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah, because he was all into jelly beans, Jelly Bellies, right? That was his thing.
Yeah. Well, yeah, man. And so, like, you know, again, I grew up as a kid, you know, worshiping like the Richard Donner Superman movies. And I didn't collect the Superman comics, but the idea of like why is Superman fighting Batman? Why is Superman portrayed? It was so shocking and different to me. Like the idea that Superman would be a brainwashed like government stooge.
Right.
And when I was 12 years old, I didn't quite grasp some of these concepts that were happening in the book were so ahead of their time. It wasn't till maybe a couple of years later, rereading all this stuff, that I was like, wow, okay, I get it. Frank Miller it has turned, like, Batman is an anarchist.
Right.
And he's fully rebelling against every possible form of authority, including the United States government and Superman. And Batman is able to defeat Superman through his wits and intelligence, and not through strength, physical strength, and brawn.
Right. And that was the thing that really got me. I was like, I can't believe Batman beat Superman. And the way Frank did it with you, like you just said, using his wits, it was like, yep, that's how he beats him.
Yeah.
Just made sense. It was good.
It's, and, you know, another thing that happened with all this was my exposure to Akira. Akira made its first U.S. theatrical tour in 1989, and the way I found out about it was I was watching The Week in Rock with Kurt Loder on MTV, and he started. there was a little press release. There was an announcement about Akira touring America, and the reason it caught my interest is Kurt Loder said Akira is in the same mature category of animation graphic novels akin to The Dark Knight Returns.
Oh, shit.
So as soon as he compared this thing that I had no idea what it was to Dark Knight Returns, I was like, well, I have to seek out this Akira thing now. Like, I have to find out what this is. And sure enough, like a couple months later, I see a listing in my local weekly newspaper for Akira playing at the Art House Theater. I go with my buddy who is my comic collecting homie, and, you know, we just have our fucking minds blown, dude.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember
how old we are in 8th grade. What were we, 13, 14?
Yeah, I was older than you, so I was in high school, but yeah, I remember having that
was another thing. I almost associate these three, like the Holy Trinity for me in terms of pop culture, of me discovering them, was Dark Knight Returns, Watchmen, and Akira were sort of like huge in my DNA of turning me into one of the things that turned me into who I am, basically.
Watchmen was much later for me. I had been told about it and exposed to it, but my young mind couldn't get past the artwork. I don't know. It was very classic superhero style artwork, and I just couldn't get into it. It just didn't draw me in. I didn't even try. But then years later, when I read it, I was just like, at that point, I was trying to figure out how comics worked and studying them, and was just blown away. I still, to this day, am not sure that there's another comic that utilizes the medium in that impressive of a fashion as Watchmen.
Right. That's like the next level, almost academic.
Yeah, it's very academic, but it's amazing.
And also the British, they have a different sensibility and approach when it comes to their version of comics and everything. So I think being raised on American comics, especially superhero comics, you have to adjust your sensibility to that British style,
Yeah, probably.
It's just something different, man.
But let's talk about like the techniques used in Dark Knight. So, I didn't have much familiarity with comics before the Dark Knight. So, but looking back on it now, and maybe it's what I liked about it. It's very indie in how it tells the story. Lots of small panels where like most superhero comics were, lots of big, filled with information panels. Frank was like almost telling the story in vignettes, these little tiny moments, and was not like if they were talking about, I'm trying to remember specifics, but if Batman's talking about something happening, let's say he's telling Jim Gordon a story, it'll focus on Jim rolling a cigar and not the story being told,
right?
Which was very different, and that I found really just interesting. It was like, oh, the way they're showing information, what they're showing you in terms of the narrative is not typical, typical at all. And what it really did for me was I felt the power of a splash page because of that book.
Yes.
I mean, you've got all these congested pages, these claustrophobic little moments, page after page after page, and then boom, a giant splash page that has such impact.
Completely,
which, the 90s kind of ruined it because like they were just doing splash pages to sell art, not for any narrative impact.
Right.
But so, dude, the whole sequence in the beginning, the way the first issue unravels is mind-blowing. It's just masterful. You've got Batman starts out with him in a race car.
Yes.
Racing, but they never once pull back to show you other cars racing. They never show you the racetrack. It's just tight close-ups of him, his hand on a gear shift, a close-up of a wheel. And not once do they ever let you feel comfortable in the scene by pulling back and showing you where everything is. Which, I mean, still to this day, I don't see comics doing that.
You're totally right. That storytelling as a kid, like that first page of Dark Knight Returns specifically with Bruce in the race and all that, like as a kid reading that, like I really had no idea what was going on. I was kind of like, who is this character now? Like, wait, okay, right. Bruce Wayne is Batman. I don't know. To me, like I was so used to just like my traditional monthly Spider-Man comics that but you're right. I mean, it's completely masterful. You're right with what you're saying, but I remember being very confused by all that.
Yeah, but must have been something about it that you were like, this is awesome too. I remember being confused for sure. And after reading it, those pages a few times, I put it together. And maybe that's what it did. It immersed me in it in a much deeper way than just giving it to me simply would have.
Right.
But then from then on, then Frank steps into, which is still blowing my mind, especially considering the world we live in today, how he told the story through the newscasters.
Yes.
And the commentators, and how news and journalism had become commentary. Which in the 80s, maybe it was starting, but that's all it is now. It's all opinion. And
I'm sorry to interrupt.
No. Go ahead.
I was going to say, we just talked about this in our Kirby inking video with the rest of the gang, but that was like that Howard Chaykin American flag kind of thing of like 16 panel pages and having like media and news reports revealing the narrative of what's actually happening.
Yeah.
And conveying so much exposition through just little talking heads where you don't have to waste all this time with it. And dude, his use of space, timing, and how he's revealing exposition throughout all of Dark Knight Returns is so masterful.
Yeah, it is.
It's a huge part of the book that
Without a doubt.
has since been, copied many times over. But I think, obviously Frank has these influences, and, Chaikin definitely one of them with what he was doing in American Flag a couple years.
Was American Flag first or Dark Knight first?
American Flag was first. I believe issue 1 of American Flag came out in like 83 or 84.
All right. There you go.
So
I got to ask Howard about that one.
Yeah.
That would be interesting to talk about for sure. But so from there, he introduces this way of telling the story through the news, which nowadays, considering our lives on the internet, how everything is fed to us through a screen, is fucking mind-blowing and profound and prophetic. But then we get into Batman coming out of retirement, and he just starts hitting Gotham, like hitting the criminals one by one, and you never see him. You see love, you see a shadow, you see like 3 or 4 incidents of him preventing a crime from happening without seeing him. And then you turn the page, and every page is like 16 panels, and then you turn it, it's just one image of Batman flying through the Gotham night.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh shit. I mean, had you laid this out differently and shown Batman earlier, the impact of that would have just been absolutely lost. And that was fucking brilliant.
So good, right? It's just...
Yeah, I mean, it really hits you emotionally. You're like, you get so excited when you see that. And I mean, that made me want to do comics, was feeling that way.
Yeah. Yeah, as a kid, man, looking at these books, reading them out of order, not really understanding what they were, I did understand that, at least, that this is something so different. This is comics, this medium that I'm really interested in and resonates with me. Can be something more,
Yes.
and relating this to music, I've always been attracted to music and genres of music and specific bands that represent that feeling of cool, you make hip hop, but like, I want something more. I want something, Pharcyde, Bizarre Ride to the Pharcyde did this for me with hip hop.
Oh, without a doubt.
You know what I'm saying? It's like, okay, I know my hip hop. I've been into this for a while. When that album dropped, it's like, this is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for guys that are going to bring something new to the table of what I'm already interested in.
Yeah, and they blew my mind with that record, because at that time, West Coast hip hop was NWA, Dr. Dre, gangster rap, Ice-T, Too Short. And here came, they were more like a Tribe Called Quest. They were more like Beastie Boys, but they were also telling these honest stories about falling in love with chicks who wouldn't be interested in them, and jokey songs like Your Mama. And it was like, I don't know. I remember like just being on the East Coast thinking like, who the fuck are these dudes releasing a sound like this on the West Coast? This is maddening.
Right.
Loved it. Yeah, I mean, that again gets to that counterculture idea. Like, the establishment in hip hop was West Coast gangster rap, and I loved it. I'm not hating on it at all. But for them to come out and go against that grain was like, fuck yeah. And I think it also was the first time hip hop got introduced to me as a universal thing, not a where are you from, what does it sound like type thing.
Right.
That
makes a difference.
That was a new idea, because if you were from New York, you had like a few sounds you could go by, but they were all New York exclusive. If you were from California, same thing. And, at the time, the South was just starting to emerge with what they were doing, but that was really about it in terms of hip hop.
Yes.
So, yeah, that Pharcyde shit fucked me up good. Still does. It's so good.
Love it. Yeah, and I've told you this before, but like in '93, that was my freshman year of art school of college, and in studio, everyone would take turns putting on CDs and listening to music while we're working at night. And the Pharcyde Bizarre Ride to the Pharcyde, man, was the only hip hop record that was just universally loved by everyone in art school. Like for some reason, it crossed over. Like the hippies loved it, girls loved it, feminists with shaved heads in art school loved it, even though there was certain lyrics to maybe contradict that. Punkers loved it, hip hop people loved it, obviously, and it was just one of those records that people would be like, put on that Pharcyde thing, and I was the guy who had the CD, and it was always fascinating to me, man, that like, what is it about this record that's just crossing over to everyone here in this room? Like, yeah. I think a big part of it was the fun, almost absurd sense of humor. But I think it's that, and the fact that they on the songs where they weren't being funny, they were being so honest and genuine. Like in hip hop, you could never like write a song about a female rejecting you. That was unheard of. That's true. And like Brown's verse on "Passing Me By" about having a crush on his teacher. It's such a sweet little story told so well. It's so engaging. You're right. And "Passing Me By" was like the song especially that I think everyone could relate to. Right. And I think Jimi Hendrix sample, right? Yeah. I think that struck a chord with everyone because, I mean, honestly, dude, no matter your race or your gender or orientation, who hasn't been rejected? Yeah, exactly. By someone they were digging, you know what I mean? Like everyone has felt that way. So, it really interesting, man. But for me, man, like this was all such a part of like how I developed as a fan of music and comics. Like as a kid, I would always try and escape my family and go to my bedroom and just listen to music. And I would read my comics, but then I would also just lay on my bed and listen to music and just flip through the comics. Yes. Oh my God. That was such a magical thing to do. Analyze the panels, analyze the artwork, and really start to think about like, how is all this stuff done? Like how right how is all this shit made, man? Like you realize when you get into art and drawing and comics, it's all based around decision making, right? And like, what decision making are you going to bring to the table that's going to give you the product you want, that you're looking for? Yeah, again, man, we grew up, we had to be so innovative in terms of how we figured shit out, and there was no internet. Like, I didn't know what inking was. I didn't know what penciling was. I didn't know what comics were even inked with. I remember hearing, it was probably right around the time Wizard magazine came out. It was the first time I was like, oh, they ink with a brush, but I didn't know what kind of brush. So I just ended up buying brushes and trying to draw with them. Right. Yeah. I had the same thing, man. I was like inking with, originally with like black pens that I was just finding at the grocery store. Yeah, me too. That I thought like maybe this is the line you use. I don't know. Yeah, I was doing the same thing. It never looked the same as what I was seeing in the books, though. And I didn't know why. And you couldn't just go to a website and look it up. You couldn't just find an email address and email someone to ask them. Oh, no. We had to be pretty innovative. The breakthrough for me, man, is this comic shop where I discovered Dark Knight Returns. Bob's Comics on East Argonne Street in St. Louis. There was a dude just behind the counter who would be hanging out chain smoking, and he was drawing, and he would ink, and he's probably in his 20s, but as an 11, 12-year-old kid, I just thought he was like an old person, and I would not dare interact with him or ask him. But man, after a year going in the comic shop, eventually I worked up the courage, and I was like, how do you like ink? Like, what are you using? And he took the cigarette out of his mouth and just like grabbed a piece of paper and wrote down for me like the tools he was using.
Oh wow!
And he was like, you have to go to an art store and find this stuff. He's like, show them this list. And so I did that, and I saved up my money, man, and I wound up buying a knockoff brand of Rapidograph pens, a full set of them. And it wasn't Rapidograph, the brand name, man. I couldn't afford that.
Right.
I bought a knockoff set of it, and my mom at the time was in the store with me, and I think it was like $25 or something for this set of pens. And my mom's like, are you sure you really want to like plunk down like $25 for a set of pens? Like, this is crazy.
But these are industrial made, refillable, like, but I totally remember that conversation, and my parents didn't understand that, like, no, these pens they're not disposable.
Right. But at the time, it was something worth thinking really hard about. Like, holy shit, man, you know how many comic books you can buy for $25?
Right.
At this time. But I figured I'm going to take the plunge. Like, I want to elevate my game and see if this makes a difference. And it really did. I mean, I figured out, some of the tricks and trades of inking before I really became an actual penciler or artist or developed a style. I just sort of became enamored with working with these tools.
Yeah, and Rapidograph's up to my graffiti game quite a bit too, because I could use that like waterproof ink and like letter everything out and then color on top, and it wouldn't fuck with my ink at all.
Oh, right. That's always a important discovery. Like,
yeah, that was awesome. Just getting back to the Dark Knight. So that was chapter 1, just blowing my mind with how it was told and how the information was unfolding. And it ends with this Batman returning to being Batman in a way that just blew my mind, got me so excited to read the next issue.
Right? I mean, that's why it's the classic that it is. And dude, the very end, this is super geek shit we might be getting into, but like at the very end of issue 1, when Batman's tackled Harvey and Harvey's bandages come off, and Batman's just like, I see a reflection, Harvey, a reflection. And it's a shot of Harvey. Harvey's view of himself is still ugly, distorted, fucked up Two-Face.
Right.
And then they show a panel of a close-up of a bat's face.
Yes.
All demonic looking. And then they show a panel of just Batman in a black silhouette.
Yeah.
And it's just like, you can't do any better than that. It's it's like, this is the coolest shit that has ever been done with this character.
Yeah, I remember when I read that, because I didn't know who Harvey was. I'd never
read that book.
So I had to ask the guy, I was like, who's Harvey? And he's like, oh, that's Two-Face. And I was like, who's Two-Face? And that guy who gave me the book explained it all to me. So then I went back and reread it. It was like, oh, fuck. So it was like this massive, like, learning. Like, I was learning the history of Batman through the comic.
Yes.
That was really exciting for me, too. And it just had balls. I mean, I don't know of any other way to say it. That book had balls.
Yeah.
And I was just a fan of anything that had balls, punk rock, hip hop, skateboarding, all of it. And that book just had the attitude. I fucking loved it. And also the Mutant Gang, which I lost my shit on because they were punkers.
Oh, yeah, completely.
They were just punkers, dude.
Yeah.
And they had their own language, their own slang.
Yeah, that's another thing is like I've read different interviews with Frank and different things about Dark Knight Returns where I think he had moved to LA pretty recently when he was working on the book, and him and Lynn Varley would hang out by like on the west side on Santa Monica by like Venice Beach and stuff, and they would hear kids talking, and they would use that slang for Carrie Kelly, like saying like aces and all that kind of slang. Apparently was them observing like LA kids at that time. And because, you know, for me growing up in the Midwest, there was stuff being used, terms and slang being used that I was like, I have no idea what some of this means. Like,
right.
You know, and so, I mean, some of it might have just been sort of made up, but I think that there was,
well, the mutant shit was made up. Like they're like dialect.
Yes. Yeah.
And it was also progressive, making Robin a girl. Like that's something you'd see in a comic today.
Now, do you know one of the comic book lore about that is Jaime Hernandez drew a picture for like Amazing Heroes magazine or some comic publication a couple years before Dark Knight Returns, and it was Batman hanging out with a female Robin.
Oh,
and
I didn't know that.
Apparently, like Frank saw that and was like, "Hey, that's a good idea. That's a cool idea." So that is sort of attributed to Carrie Kelly, but also I think the idea that Frank is deconstructing Batman and superheroes, and there was that idea of, hey, isn't it sort of creepy that there's an adult man hanging out with like a 12-year-old boy?
Right.
You know, and so it was sort of a case of the not gays to make Robin a girl as well, just because I think Frank's generation sort of grew up with questioning some of that stuff where
right.
you know, it but also, man, it's like he was making Batman his own thing to such a degree that it's like, well, sure, make Robin a girl. Like, why not?
I also
that makes complete sense.
The story was very intent on bringing up Jason's death a lot. And yes. I almost wonder, like, if it was easier for him to accept a girl because it was so the opposite of Jason. And apparently, you know, and they never got into this, but they mentioned Dick once.
Yeah.
As like, they don't talk anymore.
Yeah.
They never explained that. So I almost felt like, I wondered, like, was it easier to make Robin a girl so Batman could accept having a sidekick again? Because it was the opposite of what he was used to.
Right. And dude, how ironic, Dark Knight Returns, Jason Todd was still alive in the monthly Batman comic.
Oh, was he really?
Yeah.
Oh, shit, I didn't know that.
So Frank had sort of predicted the death of Jason Todd, and because Dark Knight is 1986, in like 88, 89, that's when DC did that, the gimmick of
Death of the
call in to this 1-900 number, 1-800 number to vote whether you want Jason to be killed off by the Joker or not.
Oh, shit. And that's when Death of the Family came out.
Exactly.
Oh, shit.
So isn't that crazy, man? Like,
yeah, you know, I knew that at the time because when Death in the Family came out, I was reading comics steadily. So, yeah, I had just forgot. I guess just reading it again and over the years, I've just assumed Dark Knight was referencing Death in the Family, but no.
Yeah.
God damn, makes it even better.
I know, right? It's it's just funny that Frank was, I don't know if he was kind of predicting like, we'll eventually kill off this annoying Jason Todd character,
or he was just setting the trend. Like he was writing the future Batman, and they hit a point where they're like, well, in the future he's going to be dead, so let's just do it and make a few bucks.
Yeah.
You know, I want to touch on something you said, because this was something I very specifically made a note to myself to talk about today with you as I was reading it the other night. So as I'm reading it, and I touched on this earlier, and especially now that I know comics, it's an indie comic in how it's told. It's not focusing on glamour shots, pinups. It's focusing, and the way he draws Alfred, it's so wonky and cartoony.
Right.
It is an indie comic, and I was thinking, like, all right, at the time, what could have influenced him to think like this? And it just hit me. I was like, he was reading Love and Rockets.
Yeah.
And so for you to say Jaime Hernandez like had that influence on him, it was like, that's exactly it. I mean, because at the time he was bringing an independent comic sense to the mainstream, which hadn't happened.
Right.
Like you did, like Crumb and Jaime, like these weren't people working for DC Comics.
Not at all. And you know, man, Ronin came out before Dark Knight Returns, and Ronin wasn't a commercial success. It was sort of considered a failure at the time, and I think it's because Frank in the 80s was so ahead of his time. Ronin, he's referencing Mobius, he's referencing Japanese manga, he's drawing
right.
Simple like deadline inking style.
Frank was. Go ahead.
I think people were very comic collectors in America were like very confused and kind of turned off by this. And then with Dark Knight Returns, I think Frank sort of took those lessons and figured out a nice fusion of all of this put together. But you're totally right, man. I mean, Dark Knight Returns is basically a DC Comics version of American Flag, Love and Rockets.
Yep.
That indie sensibility that was going on at the time. I'm trying to think of what other things to reference here, but you know, I mean, obviously the anti-hero Dirty Harry kind of sensibility of,
well, I mean, I remember reading like I mean Frank became my hero. I mean, he was the big shit for me. And the more I read about Frank and interviews with him, I just kept reading about Mickey Spillane. And so eventually I ended up reading some Mickey Spillane novels. And it was, I mean, Frank just lifted the voice right from those pages.
Okay, yeah.
Like it was almost like I liked reading the Mike Hammer novels. But in a way I was like, I wish I wouldn't have, because now I think of Frank a little differently.
Right.
Because the voice was so Mickey Spillane's, and it was Batman. I mean, Batman was Mike Hammer, and then you read Sin City, and you're like, Marv is Mike Hammer.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, Frank was an independent. He was an indie cartoonist. Like that's the one thing I've come away with from all of this is he was just an indie cartoonist who figured out or had a love for superhero books and made it work for the period he was on them.
Yeah,
he was always looking at the medium as an art form.
Yeah,
not
that's
just
great way of putting it. Him being indie, and it to me, it's kind of like, what was DC and DC editorial thinking as these pages were coming in?
I know that's the stuff I want to know. I think I asked Klaus that during my podcast with him, and I don't remember Klaus's answer, but it's a conversation I remember having to want a deeper version of, because what did they know what they had on their hands? Were they like, what the fuck have we sunk all this money into? Now we have to see it through. Like, did they know that this was like the milestone book, that and Watchmen? DC puts these books out the same fucking year?
I know.
Who's responsible for that? Where is that person of our generation?
Yeah, I mean, I know Dick Giordano was the editor on this stuff, but I mean, it was Frank who insisted on like the prestige format, the better paper. He knew Lynn Varley was going to be doing this whole painted color thing, and she's another element of the book that needs to be brought up because you know, looking at the artist edition, the black and white original art is great, but dude, the coloring, the painting makes Dark Knight Returns a completely next level.
Oh, absolutely.
Production.
The whole tone of the story is set through the color. Like you look at the black and white and it's noirish, but Lynn Varley painted it in all these grays and browns and muted blues, except for Superman.
Yes. Yeah.
Every scene with Superman is color, and it sets the whole tone of the story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing, right?
You know what else I really got excited about reading it this time? The lettering.
Oh, yeah.
Dude, that lettering is unlike any comic lettering I've seen before.
And is that...
It's John Costanza.
I'm going to flip through this. Okay, yeah.
And I want to know more about him because in this book, and I'm trying to find an example of it, when the like talking heads are talking, it's just like a journal entry. It's so hand done, and as the book goes on, I think it even gets looser and looser as we go through it. I mean, it's just beautiful lettering, like all this handwriting. I don't know. I would love to find out what else he's lettered and see how it differed from this book. And I would love to see if I could get him, if he's still doing it and still around, to letter something to mine.
That'd be amazing. I mean, I definitely know his name. He's a comics lettering legend.
Right, but I have to believe that his lettering on Dark Knight was different than what he was doing everywhere else.
Yeah.
Because it really just stands out.
The book says Dick Giordano and Denny O'Neil were both editors on the project.
Okay.
And Jeanette Kahn, she was the president and publisher of DC at the time and through the 80s.
I've heard great things about her.
I think that she was instrumental in like bringing this crazy like experimental shit into being. So
yeah,
those guys all definitely deserve their props, but I don't know, man. I just couldn't imagine. I mean, Frank Miller was hot and was a commodity, and I'm sure they knew they were going to make their money, but I'm just so.
Yeah, but at some point they were. I wonder if they were like, "Oh my God, are we going to make our money?" He's went off the rails on this one,
right? Like Batman is using a machine gun to gun down a mutant kid, and he's talking like Dirty Harry.
Yeah,
and like what were they thinking internally when these pages were coming in?
Yes, and the violence definitely spoke to me. Like that was a violent fucking book, and I loved it. Loved it.
There's passages, man, that I just are like burnt into my brain that I can quote verbatim. And when I was a kid, and I read the scene where Batman's fighting the mutant leader in the mud pits,
where he says, "I'm the surgeon."
Yes.
Oh my God.
He's like, "This isn't an opera. This isn't a mud pit, kid, or whatever. This is an operating table.
Yeah,
and I'm the surgeon." Dude, when I was a kid, I was like, "He's the surgeon? What?"
Yes.
What does that even mean? Like, this is incredible. This is incredible. Like,
yes.
Oh my God. Like,
that line fucked me up good. The whole fight, both fights with the mutant leader were the highlight.
Yeah.
The first fight, when the mutant leader bites into his trapezoid, they don't even show it. Batman says his teeth rip into my trapezoid.
Yes.
Like, what the fuck? And then they show him like eating his arm. Dude, that was so brutal. I had never seen anything like that.
Yeah.
Oh my God. And then the way he kills him, he just dismantles him.
Yeah.
Piece by piece, breaking him.
Yeah, the as a kid, the idea of a superhero being defeated was an odd idea, but then being defeated by, it's not even one of Batman's rogues gallery. It's not the Joker. It's just this new weird muscular guy with punk rock visor on beating the shit out of Batman.
And he filed his teeth down to fangs.
Yes.
Oh my God.
And
yeah.
I mean, my mind
would be like a massive part of the rogues gallery. I don't know why he's not this day. I mean, he should be. Yeah. I mean, he just kicked Batman's ass on that first fight. And it was just a fight. There was no weapons. It was just fighting. And I loved Batman could have just taken him out the very first time they met by staying in the tank and shooting him.
Yeah.
And he wouldn't do it. He had to get out and fight him. And he almost died.
Yeah. And the crazy shit is, I have it right in front of me, so I'm going to flip to it real quick. But this idea that Batman is jumping out of the Batmobile, the tank, and he's smiling.
Yes.
Look at it. He's ready. He's ready to fight. He's ready to go. And then he, proceeds to get his ass kicked.
But again, that's the splash page. That's another splash page. I mean, those splash pages are insane.
Yeah.
I can't imagine how much they're worth right now.
Yeah. It's, I think I've talked to you about it before, but when I lived in LA, I had the pleasure of going over to Dave Mandel's apartment in Hollywood. He's one of the most famous comic collectors, original art.
Yeah, Dave Mandel of Seinfeld and Veep.
Producer, on Seinfeld, showrunner on Veep. And dude, this graffiti designs collection, he owns most of these originals.
Dude.
So, I mean, I got to flip through his portfolios and he's like, here's my Dark Knight book. And I'm like, dude, you have like basically all 4 issues. This is nuts.
Yeah. Did I ever tell you about going to Chip Kidd's apartment?
Yes.
All right. Let me tell you again.
What does he have?
Okay. So Chip Kidd, and I thought this is where he lived, but it's not. He has this apartment that's his Batman apartment. And it's almost like a museum room. And there's a bedroom in there and a little kitchen. And it's a tiny little apartment, really beautiful apartment on the Upper East Side, really expensive, I'm sure. Doorman and everything. But this is like a museum of Batman memorabilia from Batman's creation until modern times. Toys, toothbrushes, like everything. But you walk in, the first thing you see on the wall is a double-page spread from Dark Knight Returns. It's 2 pages. I'm pretty sure it's when Robin is fighting the Joker's like big fat henchman on the roller coaster, and Batman kills the Joker in the Tunnel of Love.
Right.
So that's on the wall. That and also an Alex Ross Kingdom Come Batman page.
Oh shit!
So that was really cool to see. But seeing that Dark Knight Returns page was awesome in person.
Yeah, it's incredible. When I was in Singapore in November, I went to this really incredible toy museum that specializes in like comics toys, and I got in a really good conversation with the owner, and without hesitation, the guy knew who he knew who I was, and he knew I was a comic book guy. Without hesitation, he just said to me, hey, I have a bunch of Batman stuff, and I have stuff that Chip Kidd does not own. So he didn't even have to set up for me that Chip Kidd is a Batman collector. It's like,
right.
Mahfood knows what's going on.
Right, exactly.
So, and I was like, well, show me the room. Like, I got to see this stuff,
Yeah, I gotta email Chip Kidd. He really fucking, what a great day that was.
That's amazing, man.
Yeah, that was crazy. So, Yeah, so going through the mutant stuff was awesome. And like after book 1 is Two-Face. Book 2 is the Mutant Gang.
Mm-hmm.
Book 3 is
Joker, getting into the Joker.
Yeah, book 3 is Joker. But oh my God. It is so brilliant how he wove everything together. Because you see Joker in the very first issue just playing good guy, just playing the docile inmate as they're walking by his cell and they're talking about Harvey. So they keep coming back to him and you're like, what is going to happen with him? And then what the fuck is up with his henchman who builds those little flying explosive dolls?
It's so
that
bizarre.
Have like an artificial intelligence. That's the creepiest, craziest shit ever.
Yeah, you're talking about these little weirdos right here.
And they never explain what they are or anything.
No. And then, dude, this is the issue where the cops are after Batman. The Joker appears on the David Letterman show.
Yes, and they named him David
something else. Yeah, something else. And then he proceeds to murder the entire audience.
Oh, yeah, which was crazy, dude.
And then
dark.
And then Batman chases him into the amusement park, and they have their final confrontation where this was another thing, man, that I didn't understand at all as a kid, but this sequence of Batman doesn't have the balls to actually finally kill the Joker. So the Joker says basically, fuck you, and kills himself.
Yeah, he breaks his own neck.
By twisting his own neck. It's so fucking crazy. And then look at how great that is.
Oh, I know. It's so good. But dude, also when he's on the David Letterman show, he kills Dr. Ruth Westheimer by kissing her.
Yes.
That's so fucking nuts.
It's like the best of the best of just 80s references.
Yeah, but it's also that counterculture, like that fuck you to the establishment. Like, I'm going to kill Dr. Ruth. I'm going to kill David Letterman. Like, that was such a baller, like, counterculture maneuver as a writer.
That's
an
true.
artist.
Yeah.
Loved that shit. I loved anything that said fuck you to the establishment at that age.
Oh, sure.
Loved it.
And I mean, that's what hip hop was too. I mean, that's
without a doubt. And that's right. Discovering Public Enemy, and EPMD wasn't so anti-establishment. They were just in that mix for me, and I loved. I mean, they were funk. Like they were the first rap group that like Eric Sermon brought funk to hip hop. Like I didn't know much about funk at all.
Right.
And so that was it. But for me, it was discovering KRS-One.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved the Public Enemy. I mean, that was hard, balls to the wall, fight music, like rebellion music. But KRS-One was a little smoother about it. He was saying some of the most rebellious shit, but in the clearest, most smooth and soulful way, and using words I'd never heard before. He was teaching me. And he called himself a philosopher. I mean, I remember the record starts, so you're a philosopher? Yes, I think very deeply.
Yeah.
That shit, that was it. From that day on, KRS-One was my favorite MC.
I feel you. Yeah, no, you're right. His records were like going to school. It was like
called it edutainment. Remember?
Yeah.
BDP edutainment. I loved it. It was educational. It had a purpose. It wasn't just fluff or filler. And it wasn't just the heart of rebellion. It wasn't just the spirit of rebellion. It was like a scholarly quality to it on top of it.
Right. Hey, man, there's a documentary that came out in the 80s, I think 89, maybe 90, called Comic Book Confidential.
Yeah. Yes. Oh my God, I forgot all about that.
I think it's available on Amazon Prime. If anyone out there watching wants to check it out, totally worthwhile. They interview Frank Miller, Dave Sim, Eisner, Jack Kirby, Harvey Kurtzman. But the Frank Miller section, he's like fresh off of just finishing Dark Knight Returns, and the things he says about the book are really, interesting, and his motivation for making the book, and the fact that it's a commentary on, Reagan's America, which I think he says directly. He's like, which is a very frightening and silly and funny, weird place all at the same time.
Right.
He's like, that's what I wanted Dark Knight Returns to be. I wanted it to be frightening and silly,
Yeah.
It's like the long-haired Frank Miller.
Right. Dude, I forgot all about that documentary. I don't think I've seen it since I saw it that one time in the 80s.
Oh, dude, rewatch it. It's really worth checking out. Just the lineup of talent that's in it. The Hernandez brothers are in it.
You just said Kurtzman, and I'm like, I didn't even know who Harvey Kurtzman was, and I had no idea he would go on to be one of my biggest influences in my work.
Yeah.
Oh shit, I gotta watch that again.
Kurtzman's the man.
Yeah, I mean, you know what? We should definitely figure out a podcast to talk about Kurtzman for sure. There's a lot to say about him. He's the father of indie comics. His storytelling techniques are still some of the best I've ever seen, and I use them all the time.
Him creating Mad Magazine basically created a whole new genre of satire and humor in America that, his influence, man, is beyond comparison. It's
and I gotta ask Klaus, because I always saw Kurtzman's inking as a massive influence on Klaus, and like Giordano, who obviously influenced that whole generation of inkers.
Yeah, I could see that. It's interesting. We're talking about Harvey because looking at the artist edition last night, man, I swear there's some drawings in Dark Knight Returns when you see the color removed that they almost look like Harvey Kurtzman.
Yeah, that's what like a lot of the drawing is so indie looking. And like Kurtzman. Yeah, I could see that for sure, man. Fuck. It's just an extraordinary piece of work that Dark Knight Returns. That I'm so glad. I mean, I'm so glad I got to discover it like when I did. And how I did, because the whole thing to me was just such a strange, baffling thing that I was fascinated by it, but also sort of like intimidated and confused by the whole thing, Yeah, I mean, as good art should do, it should challenge you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just remember it just firing me up. Like, I was drawing Dark Knight Returns shit for a while after reading it.
Right.
And holding every comic up to that standard.
It's like, how could you not?
And yeah, exactly. And then I remember from there, like, that's when I did a deep dive into comics. And I was just looking for anything with Frank Miller's name on it. And so then I got Born Again, and that fucked me up too a bit. I remember like looking at it in the store and being like, whoever this artist is, they're kind of crummy, but it looks like Frank, like the storytelling and the subject matter. I'll give it a shot. And I loved it.
Right.
And I was like, why do I like this artwork? It's so like crude. Because at the time, I was young and wanted flash. Like I would say the same thing about Frank's work probably at that time too. Mm-hmm. But I was like, Todd McFarlane and Arthur Adams were the shit in terms of drawing.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I read Born Again more than any other comic I was picking up, and all the McFarlane comics, the Spider-Man books, I was reading Born Again over and over. And that still to this day is my favorite Mazzucchelli work.
Yeah. Yeah. Masterful stuff, man. And I mean, I'm a huge fan of Batman Year One, but when Year One came out, since Frank wasn't drawing it,
right
at the time, it didn't have the impact on me because David's art, I dug it, but I didn't quite understand it.
That's exactly how I felt. I didn't, yeah.
I didn't realize that I was witnessing one of the most masterful storytellers to ever work in comics.
Yeah, and I remember reading something where at the time where Frank was talking, it was like an interview, he was talking about Mazzucchelli. He's like, when I saw how brilliant of a storyteller he was, I rewrote the script to get out of his way. Mm-hmm. I was like, all right, I got to understand what that means. And he said the same thing about Sienkiewicz on Electro Assassin. But that one was more obvious because Sienkiewicz, I mean, when he tells a story, it's nothing. It's storytelling like you've never seen before. It's
right.
So out there and different.
Yeah. And I think Frank and, what I've read, what I understand with Electro Assassin, like Frank and Bill's process in that was so organic that Frank would, like rewrite entire pages just based on like the art that Bill was turning in. So it reads, when you read Electro Assassin, which I recommend everyone do, it's much more of an organic kind of like art piece, conceptual piece than his other collaborations with like, Year One or something like that. But when you're collaborating with Sienkiewicz, it's like you just sort of have to step out of the way. And
yeah, exactly. We're going to have to do a deep dive on all these books we're talking about, like podcasts, like we're doing with Dark Knight. We'll have to do definitely Electro Assassin. Maybe do Year One and Born Again together because it's the same team. But yeah, that
right. Yeah.
That shit would be fun for sure. But yeah, so we get that Joker issue is fucking insane. And it ends with the Joker killing himself, which, that was just fucking amazing. And,
I was still learning the vocabulary and language of comic book storytelling. And like I said, there was things in Dark Knight Returns that I sort of didn't know what they meant or what they were. And the Joker and Batman having this final confrontation, like I as a kid, I just didn't put two and two together that the Joker had killed himself. Like the idea that someone could break their own neck.
Yeah. I don't.
Such a strange and disturbing thing that as a kid, it went over my head.
Yeah, and the way he taunts him, where he's like paralyzing me, really.
Right.
But yeah, I don't think I picked up on the fact that the Joker killed himself there. I think I thought he was alive until the explosion.
Oh, yeah.
I don't remember as a kid reading that and understanding it either. I've read it so many times I can't remember exactly, but I think I was like you. And not.
Yeah, the whole book, dude, I was enamored by it, but I was also kind of like, what the fuck is going on with some of this stuff?
Yeah, I think last night when I was like finishing the book was the first time I understood that Superman didn't save America with the nuclear bomb. He did exactly what Russia wanted to be done.
Right.
The plot was to change the atmosphere and environment of America to put it in this nuclear snowstorm.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize that. I was like, oh shit, Superman saved everyone. But then reading it last night, I was like, oh my God, I don't think I ever picked up on that bit.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot going on with all that kind of stuff. And then the very ending too, I think, is sort of like open to interpretation. I've heard people say that the ending is Batman is building a new army, and that army he's going to take out into the world at some point and just like take over.
That's what I thought. Like reading it last night, that I was like, oh shit, Batman's just bringing anarchy to the world next.
Yeah. Because Frank Miller's original script for the end of Dark Knight Returns was Batman wins and Batman is like sitting on a throne like Conan, and he's,
oh my God,
he's taken over. He's like, anarchy has taken over, and I'm like the new king. I'm the new guy in charge.
Yeah.
So, like, I beat Superman. I outsmarted the governments. I'm in charge now. Like, let's try and get this shit right, you know? But dude, I love it. I love that there's different sort of interpretations of all this kind of stuff, you know?
Yeah. And then Alfred at the end dying. I always read that panel when I first read it. I read that panel as him falling. Like, it's him on the ground with the rocks around him. And for some reason, I read it as he was falling off, like jumping off a cliff, suicidal with the rocks falling.
Right.
But yeah, that's not the case. I mean, the book is an experience. It's a reading experience.
Definitely.
I mean, for me, and I say this a lot, I just feel like comics is regressed in such a way as a medium. Not every comic, but if superhero comics, definitely. It's all become so disposable, gimmicky, quick reads. I don't see a lot of comics coming out through most publishers that are creating reading experience where the medium, the way, just the design of the story itself, the design of how it looks from a macro, not a micro perspective, but a macro. Like Dark Knight Returns is a bunch of congestion with these giant breathable moments.
Right.
And Watchmen has its 9-panel rhythm. I don't see a lot of experimentation being done with that nowadays. And I feel like the only way to do it is to do what you're doing, where you're writing and drawing your own shit.
Yes.
Because to do that at a publisher it just seems undoable. And a lot of it is the writers owning a lot of how the controlling the vision of the publishers and not understanding the medium. I think Alan Moore I was thinking about this the other day. I think people mistake Alan Moore where they see how much control his scripts had and they make the mistake that they should do that. But the thing about Alan Moore is, and I don't know of another writer that can pull this off. He understands the medium. He understands how it works.
Oh yeah.
He can draw well enough to understand that. And I don't see that in writers today at all.
Right.
So that's something. I mean, look, The Dark Knight Returns just reminded me again of what I want to do with comics. I've lost way with that, and I want to get back to it. But yeah, I mean, that story, it's a reading experience, and not just the drawing, not just what's happening, but how it all unfolds, how the layout of the pages on a micro level come together on a macro level. It's just brilliant.
It's masterful. Yeah. And it's just a blast, man, to go into that world. You know, you are taken somewhere else, you know, when you're in the Dark Knight Returns world. It's just a trip, man. It's awesome.
So how do you feel that Frank's been revisiting that world? World.
You know, to me, it's like it doesn't exist in the same Dark Knight universe, but it's kind of hard to talk about the other books, the sequels and stuff for me, because it's like Dark Knight Returns is just such its own
Right.
self-contained thing that
Right.
people are very upset about Dark Knight Strikes Again, the sequel, or this or that. And to me, it's like, it's fine that it exists. I don't put it in the same category as.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
It's fine that it exists. Dark Knight, what was that one called? The second one? Dark Knight Strikes Again? Is that what it was?
Or Dark Knight Strikes Back, is it?
Dark Knight Strikes Back. Well, yeah, whatever it
Or
was
Strikes
called.
Again. Yeah, I don't know.
That just felt to me like a superhero book, like a giant playground of superheroes. Whereas the Dark Knight Returns didn't feel that way. It felt like an indie book.
Yes.
And then they did the next one, DK3, which was just a mainstream superhero book at that point.
Yeah.
I feel like the one with Raphael Grampa was a return to the idea it's an indie comic.
Yeah, I mean, the Raphael one, I dug it. I'll be honest. I read it twice, and I sort of don't understand some of Frank's writing style.
Yes, I agree with you on that.
But, I mean, obviously, Raphael, his artwork is just gorgeous. I mean, he's amazing. I don't know, man. It's like some of Frank's projects in the past are they're just lightning in a bottle. Like, I don't think you can recapture that energy again.
I agree. But yeah, it's just funny that they did this book that was so incredibly successful over time. And the reason it succeeds is because it's an indie book, and then they try to do it again and it's a mainstream book.
Right.
I mean, I will say that the one that the second one that was under Shrek, it started under Shrek. It didn't finish under him, right?
Shrek edited the one that came out in like when 9/11 happened. You know,
right.
Part of Shrek's deal, man, when DC brought him over to become Batman Group editor, was Shrek was kind of like, I think I can get Frank to come back, because Frank are real good friends. So that's how they got him. They also, the legendary story, like DC literally paid Frank $1 million
right
to make Dark Knight 2. So
but I think Frank's motivations for that book were different than Dark Knight Returns. I think Dark Knight Returns, he really had a story to tell, and then the second one was like, oh, I can make a lot of money if I write and draw something for them.
Yeah.
Which is fine. I don't hate on anyone for doing that. I'm just pointing out the different motivations. They probably do affect the art, I guess.
Oh, yeah. And then the thing I still don't quite understand, man, is Frank started working on Dark Knight 2. He's living in New York, and then 9/11 happens, and then apparently he changes the direction of the story, of the script, and he's got, aircrafts crashing into buildings, and he turns Lex Luthor basically into this like George Bush totalitarian guy, and the book becomes a thing about like, individual rights and the government spying and the Patriot Act. So I'm maybe people out there know the story better than I do, but it's like Frank had this vision of what he was doing, and then it was dramatically and immediately changed by the events of 9/11.
It's funny you said that, because one thing I said this earlier, that Dark Knight Returns is pretty profound, and it has a plane crashing into a building in Gotham City, causing absolute havoc in the city. And that was in 1986.
Right.
But for such an one of the things I did want to talk to you about was Dark Knight Returns is such an anti-establishment book, and then Frank goes on for a period to become this ultra-conservative, vengeful, sinking human being, almost the opposite of the person that wrote Dark Knight Returns.
Yeah. He started speaking out against Occupy Wall Street.
Yeah.
when that was happening, and everyone was like, "Isn't this the guy that wrote like Dark Knight Returns?" Like,
right,
what?
exactly.
He's like, "Get a job, you hippies!" Or
yes,
whatever.
yes, exactly.
I don't know. I don't know what happened. I have the utmost respect for him as a creator. So
yeah, me too.
Not knowing the full story, it's kind of like,
well, I just saw it as, if you're in New York when something like 9/11 happens, it's going to traumatize you.
yes,
You don't know how it's going to affect you unless you live through it and are in it. So I imagine it scared the crap out of him, made him feel sad, angry, and all these emotions. And it like any stage of mourning, you deal with anger, and his anger manifested in that way, is my guess.
definitely. Well, he pitched Batman Holy Terror
Right.
as the next book, and then I don't know, man. Again, I don't know the full story, but when the script came in, I think DC said thanks, but no thanks, and then he just took the Batman out of it and made the book Holy Terror for Bob Schreck at Legendary.
Yeah.
And then he just whited out all the Batman ears on the character. And I mean,
wait, he had drawn it already?
Yeah, he'd drawn some of the pages and stuff.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And then again, it's one of those Frank projects that I'm like, well, I didn't read it, and I don't really know anyone who's said anything good about it.
Yeah,
let's just leave that one off to the side and pretend like it didn't happen.
I haven't read it either, and that was around the time where I was like, it was hard for me to admit it, but I think my hero has lost me. Because I worshipped every project he did. Sin City came out and destroyed me the same way Dark Knight did.
Yeah.
And I fucking loved it. And then I really liked 300. The format of it, the way the story was told. Again, he was designing the story differently. But everything after that, I was lost. Yeah,
I mean, maybe, I don't know, certain creators, you can't maintain the juice forever.
Well, we grow as people and change, and as an artist, and not always, I think it's better to do that and stay stagnant. But a lot of times the change, you people who love what you do, when you change, don't love what you do anymore.
Right. But yeah, man, when that, especially the very first Sin City book, the Marv and Goldie one.
I loved all of them. I think the one where it started to lose me was the graphic novel Family Values. I was like, I think we're done with Sin City.
Oh, okay.
That was the Miho centered one. And I was like, it just felt repetitive.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if I have that one.
Because I loved A Dame to Kill For and loved That Yellow Bastard.
Yeah, that's a really good one.
Yeah. And then after that, there were a few little one-shots like Silent Night, which I really liked. And then Family Values. And I was like, oh, that didn't have me like the other ones.
Mm-hmm. And dude, the other standout gem for me that's kind of like one of the missing links in the Miller archives is the Elektra Lives Again graphic novel.
Oh, dude, that
so good.
Is his best. In terms of page design, it is his best. That's where everything he was doing in The Dark Knight came together. Like, The Dark Knight was unique and new, but he had polished it and understood it. And that Daredevil book is the most beautifully drawn thing he's ever done, and the most masterful storytelling he's ever done. That thing, it's Eisner. There's so much Eisner in that book.
Yeah.
Crazy. But in a new refreshing way. He's not just biting it, but how he, like, shoots a shot from the top of a staircase looking down, and the characters are walking through the staircase having a conversation, and you just sit there on this one image, on this one page, reading this story, immersed in this environment. Oh, it's fucking incredible.
Incredible. And it's probably my favorite of him and Lynn Varley's.
Yes.
Because, I mean, there would be no book without her painting in it. Her painting and coloring is just next level.
And that's where her coloring really lit up for me, too. I mean, they were painting like stained glass windows, like Mondrian paintings.
Mm-hmm.
It was just fucking incredible, masterful. And also, what a strange and awesome story.
I know.
To bring like supernatural shit into the Daredevil world is so out there.
Yeah, and it's like even Bullseye gets resurrected, and then Elektra has to like cut his head off, and he dies again. It's very really like sort of strange and surreal. But
yeah, maybe that's the next one we got to do, because you're right. That one came out. It was a hardcover only, expensive ass graphic novel, and I would go to the comic shop every day and look at it and want it and couldn't afford it and wouldn't sacrifice like a bunch of floppies to get it, and then it disappeared.
Right.
And I was like, fuck, I never got it. And then Graffiti reissued it like years later.
Right.
And I got it. And then Marvel put out a smaller, soft paperback version of it. So I got that one too.
Nice.
But
that was one that I put it on my Christmas list the year it came out. And my mom was always really good, man, about like going to the comic shop. And
oh, that's great.
She would, if she could find it, she would buy me specific graphic novels that I had listed on my list. And that was one that I got. And man, cracking it open during Christmas break when that came out, I thought it was great, but it was not what I was expecting. I thought it was going to be Daredevil in costume and Elektra. And at the time, I think with all of Frank's stuff, I mean, I just absorbed it when I was young, and I sort of didn't understand some of the stuff going on in it,
Yeah.
But I was, young.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a little older than you. So it's funny how like just 2 years can make such a difference, because in terms of maturity,
oh yeah. Yeah.
So different. But yeah, I mean, it's important to note that Frank was not just paying attention to the story, not just the script, not just the drawing, but the format that it would be delivered in. And Elektra was like, this is a fine book, and I'm going to present it in a hardcover, oversized fashion.
Mm-hmm.
And again, nowadays, it's just like Marvel is so disposable. Their trades are on shitty paper. And I mean, I don't know. Frank just really had a respect for the medium and did a lot of work to elevate it in terms of the public's eye and through the books he did.
Oh, completely. Yeah, it's man, I've sort of like turned my back on mainstream comics at this point. I mean, it's not that if something comes out that I dig, I mean, I'll buy it, I'll try it out, but for the most part, I feel myself going back to a more just independent, do it all yourself attitude. And my favorite artists and cartoonists working right now are all guys that just are sort of doing their own thing.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I feel the same way. I mean, I'm having to work pretty diligently to steer my career in that direction. It's a little trickier. I was just so stuck on that path, and to revert back to a different course it just takes a little time and planning so you can financially survive it. But yeah. I agree with you 100%. I mean,
revisiting Dark Knight Returns for me, it is sort of like, well, how can I just do my own version of this? Like, it's not going to be as good as this on a thought out epic level, but as far as in terms of like crazy fun, originality. You know, it's still something to aspire to. And it is like the best-selling indie comic book of all time.
Yeah.
Disguised by having a DC logo on the cover, but it is not a DC.
No, it's an indie book all the way.
Yeah.
And maybe that's been, I don't know, for me, maybe that's been my problem is I always wanted to follow that path. And I've been trying to work in mainstream comics with wanting to do indie comics. And maybe I'm just realizing that now. But yeah, it was an indie book.
There's exceptions to the rule. Like, I mean, you were part of Young Animal, obviously, right? So yeah. I think with Gerard Way's original intentions and what Young Animal was in the beginning, and I can't speak for it now because I'm not paying attention, but
it doesn't exist anymore.
Oh, shit. Okay.
I don't think so. I mean, I think Doom Patrol has a few moments here and there. I don't think it's coming out regularly anymore.
Oh, okay.
I might be wrong.
Right.
Go ahead. You were saying.
Well, no, my point was like, okay, well, that's indie comics, but it is being funded by a major publisher.
Right. Right.
But the sensibility and the what those guys were presenting it to be seemed like this is a step in the right direction, you know?
Yes. When they asked me to be a part of it, I was very excited for that very reason. I was like, oh, we're going to do punk rock comics at DC. All right. I'm down.
Yeah.
But then it turned out to not be that.
Right. You know, it's the effort was there.
I just don't think that those companies will. I don't want to say allow it. I don't think they understand it enough to know how to nurture it. I think you can have some editors on staff who do, but ultimately they see it as too much of a risk financially. But it's not like they're doing well with their other stuff. I don't know. It's a strange time.
No, I feel you. It's yeah. I don't know what their plans are. Like the mainstream publishers, the direction that they've all been going in the last 5 years or so, to me, is just sort of baffling. So I know that like I'm probably not ever going to be a part of that. So
yeah,
focus on the direction I want to go in. Focus on doing my thing, and that's.
Yeah, I think that's the smart thing to do, and the way to keep your enthusiasm for the work you're doing alive too.
Yeah,
I mean that's definitely the direction I want to head in. I've got these other like projects in the hip hop world I'm working on to help fund that transition.
And that's how you do it.
That's all you can do, man.
You know, I've always had that balance of like, do one for them and then one for me, you know?
Smart. That's really smart, Jim.
And the trick is just getting into the position where the them is approaching you. You know, when I say the them, I mean like people with money that will let you be you.
Yeah.
Finding that fit, finding that those clients, I mean, that in itself is a challenge, but once it starts happening for you, you'll find like things are falling into place, shit's locking into place, you know?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I've just learned a lot from watching you. I need to be more specific in asking you how you did things, but yeah, you're doing it right, man. You really are.
Thank you. I hope, you know, there's no like set system of how to pull all this off. Like everyone's going to have a different path, obviously, you know?
Yeah. So, that's very true. That's very true.
But you aligning yourself with the proper hip hop people, that I think is definitely a step in the right direction.
Yeah, and it allows me to get back to doing things I love with people I'm excited about doing it with.
It's awesome, man.
All right, bro. I think, is there anything else in the book that you were hoping that you wanted to touch base on that we didn't touch?
Let me think for a quick second here.
I definitely, yeah, I'm trying to think too, but I think covered so much of it.
Yeah, it's something that, you can sort of just talk about forever, but
yeah, I think if anything, it definitely inspired me wanting to do. I mean, look, I've got already a few of these podcasts planned where we're picking a piece of comic history, talking about it, drawing about it, and I mean, one that will probably air before this one maybe is the one you and I are recording this Saturday with Dave Crossland.
Oh, yeah.
That's going to be the Double Doom episode where we're going to talk about the Doctor Strange, Doctor Doom book Mignola did in the 80s. And we're going to draw Doctor Doom and do a deep dive on MF Doom.
Mm-hmm.
So that one I'm excited about. But yeah, after today, I'm like, maybe Elektra Lives Again is a good way to go. And we got a lot of stuff we can fucking talk about. That's for damn sure.
Definitely. I will say, give a little shameless plug to Shitty Dark Knight.
Oh, yeah, that's it. That's what I meant to talk about. Yeah. So, Jim, tell us about Shitty Dark Knight.
Okay, so my buddy Dave Baker lives in LA, is a writer, artist. His girlfriend, Nicole Gao, also fantastic artist. They self-publish books like Fuck Off Squad and Action Hospital. Check them out. Nicole just illustrated a full-blown Batgirl graphic novel for DC, which I think is called Shadow of Batgirl or something. But anyway, long story short, these guys did a shitty Watchmen book a couple years ago where they had 12 different artists completely redraw all 12 issues of The Watchmen. And then Dave approached me and did a similar thing with Dark Knight Returns, where we all chose 10 pages of the book and then remixed them, recreated them in our own, unique way. Some people did stuff as simple as like doing stick figure interpretations. I wound up redrawing the first 10 pages of issue 4. So you guys can kind of see, it's the scene where Batman has just defeated the Joker and the cops are coming in to grab him. Real fun because I got to draw Batman, Robin, the Joker, and Superman. And you can score the book at jimmahfood.com if you want one. I'll send it to you.
That's
But man, it was a really, really fun exercise because redrawing Frank Miller's pages, like I actually got a lot out of it.
Right. That's what I want you to talk about for sure.
And, it's an obvious thing to say, but his storytelling, man, like when you recreate his work and you kind of put yourself in his shoes and understand the rhythm and pacing of what he's doing and his decision making, to me, it was like, this guy's making all the right choices.
Yeah.
It's an obvious thing to say because it's Frank Miller, but the crazy thing that blows my mind, dude, is I don't think Frank was even 30 years old when he did.
I know.
He was like 28, 29 or whatever. And, I'm in my mid 40s now and I've never done anything that can even compare to this level of brilliance, but redrawing his work and putting myself sort of, in his shoes, like I said, it was like, oh, I sort of understand some of his approach of what's going on here. And the decision-making, man, is just so on point with what he was doing.
Was there any specific lesson you remember learning from doing that still affected you to this day?
Shit. Nothing specific, but just the knowledge of like all these shots that he's using and the way he's placing the camera and what he's focusing on. It's all the right decision.
Yeah.
To the point that it's like, this guy's just a natural and he's making it look so easy.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And when you factor in, he made 4 issues of this, right? Where there's so many pages with 16 panel grids and stuff. It's like the amount of decision making and planning that went into this book is extraordinary.
Yeah, it is.
So, and then, you know, just the fact to further infuriate me and all those watching is this is the work of a guy who's not even 30 years old yet.
Yeah.
It's staggering, man. It's an incredible accomplishment.
It is. It's one of the best.
There's a reason why it's in everyone's top 10 of all time comics, you know, ever made. If it's not in your top 10, you need to re-examine it and check it out again, because
I agree.
It's incredible.
And if you haven't read it, you're in comics or into comics, you have to read it.
Yes.
It's one of those books.
And if you're someone who's here just because of like the Pharcyde connection or hip hop, and you don't need to understand Batman mythology necessarily or modern Batman comic books to pick this up, you can just pick this up and read it and have a blast with like how unique and bizarre it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what I loved about it was I didn't have that knowledge. I came to the book with no real understanding of Batman at all or DC Comics at all, and I loved it, and that really spoke to my like punk rock spirit, because in a way, I mean, like I said, it's an indie comic at a mainstream publisher. It just has a fuck you attitude to it.
Yeah, definitely, man. And I love that he got them to like give him his own format and his own printing production. And I think he was involved in overseeing the printing proofs and just making sure that he was going to get 100% of what he wanted this book to be, you know, because that's one of the things that made it stand out, man. It made it sell out immediately as soon as it came out. Was if you could afford a $3 comic book in 1986, this is something completely different.
Yeah.
You know, you're going to be getting your money's worth. So, you know, little 11-year-old me couldn't afford that, but other people could for sure.
All right, Jim. I think we've reached a point where we've talked the talk. Let me see.
Your inks look so sick on that, especially the mutant leader. Like, that's
thanks, man.
Pure butter. Look at that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm gonna. That's what I want to do is talk about the pieces right now. So, just talking about mine. It's not finished. I'm getting close to being done. I got to do the mutant gang, and I got some plans for the background and the smoke. But what I'm going to be doing on the podcast from now on is putting the finished pieces in the video at the end. So you guys who are watching this now will see it very shortly, because it will be edited right into the end of this. But I still have a little bit of time left on it to do it. And Jim, let's see your piece and tell us what you're doing.
Yeah, I'm the same way, man. I'm going to add color to this. But I basically have the Sons of the Bat and like one of the mutant guys. I've got Carrie in here, and I've got like the armor plated Batman.
Dude, that helmet fucked me up when I saw it too. Seeing Batman in all that armor and that helmet was so cool, but then Superman just rips it right off. That was pretty cool.
I know.
All right, cool. So I'm gonna hit stop here in a second. Jim, shout out your social media and anything else you want to mention right now, so people can check out more of your stuff.
Yes, I'm at Jim Mahfood on Instagram and Twitter. JimMahfood.com if you want to pick up Shitty Dark Night or any of my books.
Yeah, please support Jim any way you can. He's got some awesome stuff. And I am at Inkpulp. INKPULP. I think what we'll do is at the end of these videos, we'll put our little social media tags on a screen as well, so you can follow it there too. Thank you for listening. Got a lot more coming. I've got some hip-hop artists already in the works. Just got an email when Jim and I were talking. Spoke to someone else this morning. Got some big plans for this podcast. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Peace.